Welcome back to another episode of Build with a Plan with Coach David here. I'm putting out this podcast to hopefully help you business owners out there that are looking to level up your business. Most of us, we know what we're doing. We're good at the business that we're at, but specifically performing the service or getting the product out there. But some of us may not have some of the skills or the knowledge of actually what it takes to build a business to the next level. So that's what I want to talk about, and that's why I put on this podcast. Hopefully you will glean some information from this, and hopefully it can help you level up as your business grows. So today I want to talk about bundle your way to new profits. There are lots of ways to get out there and help business or help your business stand apart, but one of the real key ones is to do an apples to oranges comparison. And what I mean by that is if you are producing the same product or service as the competitor, that's an apples to apples comparison. And what that means is that price is the only differentiating factor between those two services. Kind of an extreme example I like to use is a bottle of Coke. You can buy a bottle of Coke at this store for $2, or you can buy a bottle of Coke at this store for $1.50. Chances are you're going to go to the store that sells it for $1.50 because the product is exactly the same. The quantity, the flavor, the quality is the same. It is just 25% cheaper at the other store. So that's a differentiating factor. But the problem with that is when you want to be the lowest price, it basically is a race to the bottom. Because then obviously the only way the other store could get that business back if they undercut the $1.50. And like I said, now it's $1.25 and now it's $1, and then there is absolutely no profit in there at all, and the business ends up closing down or going bankrupt because it has no profit and it can't pay the bills. So that's the version of lowest price is basically a race to the bottom. So what I like to put out there is, well, this bottle of Coke over here costs $2, but the one at the other store costs $1,000. But here's the kicker. If you buy that Coke, you get a weekend away to Las Vegas free of charge for two people, all expenses paid, if you buy this Coke for $1,000. Yes, I know that's kind of a humorous, extreme example, but the point is that it is not an apples to apples comparison anymore. Yes, most consumers out there are value-based buyers. What that means is that they're looking to get the best value at the best price. Yes, don't get me wrong. There are some penny pinching people out there that all they care about is what price they're paying. It doesn't matter if they're getting inferior quality, inferior product, inferior service. All they want to do is get that one little thing solved in their life at the cheapest. But hear me, most people want to buy value. So they're willing to pay a little bit more if they know they're getting 2, 3, 4 times the value of the competition. So this is a great opportunity. You don't want to miss out on this opportunity to set yourself apart from your competition. And it can really be if it's a service-based business, you have lots of layers, lots of opportunities to create an apples to oranges comparison. When it comes to a product, it's a little bit more challenging, but you need to look at it and say, what could I add to this product? Whether it's a warranty, whether it's a delivery and something else, or do you bundle a couple products together? Now, this is where math, yes, unfortunately, I'm going to throw this out there. This is where math becomes an important part of this strategy. You want to make sure that you are not giving something away. You want to make sure that both or multiple things that you're putting out there have a profit to it. But just think about this. You could actually add more profit to a service without doubling and tripling that service. And one thing we want, here's a great example. I use this all the time. Let's assume that you own a landscape business. And basically what you do is you cut grass and you clean up, and that's one price. So it's a weekly price. This is what I'm going to charge. And then let's say you're charging $100 a week. And then the next person comes along and says, "Oh, I do it for $95 a week." And then the next person comes along, "Oh, I do it for $90 a week." So now you've got multiple competition all in around the same price range. So typically, if you're at 100 and then the cheapest is 90, and from the outside looking in, the client or the prospect at this point doesn't know the difference between company A and company C. All they know is that the service they're going to pay for or the price they're paying is either $100 or $90. And typically they're going to go with the $90 option because it is less expensive. Obviously there's some personality areas in there as well, because perhaps somebody is a really good salesperson, but if their quality isn't really up there, then that doesn't really matter. So why don't we avoid all that together, and why don't you look at, because you're already going to be there. So here's the key factor here. If you plan your team or set up your team and give them some added training where they can learn or know, have the equipment and know how to do some tree trimming, and pruning, weeding, and perhaps even window cleaning. Maybe you throw in a spring and a fall cleanup into the package. Obviously, you would only do that in the spring and in the fall. But if you approach the prospect and you say, well, normally, other people charge $100 for the grass cutting, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut your grass. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to trim and prune some of your trees. I'm going to weed this garden, and in the spring I'm going to clean your windows and do some branch cleanup and on all that. And then in the fall, we will make sure certain things are done. And for that, it's going to be $180 a week. Yes, that's a much higher version price point than $100, but look at all the other value you're getting in there. And again, as long as you do the math and make sure that your hourly wage is covered, that you've got a profit margin built in there, and make sure that they're either trained and or have the equipment to make it easier to do those additional services, then you've got it all figured out, and that's the price point that you put it at. You're adding a lot more value. Yes, you're 80% more on the price, but think about this. Now, if they go $180, go, wow, that's a lot, and then they go, or a lot of different services, I'm very happy with that. And then they call up, company B that only does the grass cutting for $100 and says, well, what happens if I get you to trim my trees, weed my garden, clean up my house, windows, and do a spring cleanup and a fall cleanup, that type of stuff. What would that cost? Because that competitor hasn't already figured out the math and the training, they might even just say, oh, I can't do that because I'm not set up for that. Or the competitor could be thinking, okay, well, we're going to have to go back for the tree trimming. I need a different crew for that. And then the window cleaning, I don't really have the system in the process to do that. And then they say, okay, well, I can do all that, but it's going to end up costing you $220 a month. Because, or typically they're going to say, I can't do that. I'm not set up for that. Or that's a completely different service. So it's $100 for this, and then it's going to be, $60 for that and $50 for this, because they don't have it already planned out. Now, when the homeowner is thinking, well, this person doesn't really know, but I can get all this from this company that's going to do it for $180, that's what I want. Everything's looked after. I don't have to think about it. It's all built into a price. I'm comfortable because that's what they came to the table with. Whereas the other people, it's ad hoc, and like I said, they might not be prepared for it. You could tell by the way that they respond to that. And again, you got to remember, like, you plan it so that you do all this on the same time you're there for the grass cutting. Make sure the equipment is there. Make sure the staff is trained. Maybe you send an additional staff member that day to make sure, or maybe, when it's a spring cleanup or window cleaning, you send, 4 guys or 4 people instead of 2 people to make sure everything goes smoothly, and you can do it pretty much in the same time. As long as you've planned it all out, make sure you know your numbers, make sure you're profitable, then you go in with that bundle, and chances are you're going to score with the prospects and add to your profit. So that's why I want you to look at the bundling part of your business. What can you put together that can create an apples to oranges comparison versus an apples to apples? You want to take the price right out of it. You want to make sure that you're selling on value, not on price. And that will give you an advantage because, again, you've done the math before. You know where your profits are at. You know that this is a good value for the client, but also it adds more revenue and profit to your bottom line. So my challenge to you this week is to take a look at your business, whether it's product or service based. What can you do to bundle to create an apples and oranges comparison? Look at it, figure out the right price, and put it out there. Start marketing it, start offering it to your clients, and then watch your profits and your revenues go up. All right, until next time, Coach David out.